We will now move on to Tisha Aragaki's presentation entitled Off the Cutting Room Floor, Finding Moving Image Gems. So Tisha, I will pass it on to you.
All right. Well, wow, that is a hard one to follow. You guys were amazing. So I'm going to take a different tack here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you just about Ulu Ulu Archive, what we do, and hopefully how you can make better use of our collection. Because in my experience with History Day, I've learned that it's a little bit hard for people to know how to navigate. And every year with History Day, the topics are very open-ended, and it's a little hard for some students to find just what way to approach. So I'm going to take it from emphasizing what I think is one of the most valuable things about our collection. So I am the assistant archivist for reference and outreach. I would be the person that would be helping anyone navigate through this process, students and educators alike. So I'll do a quick introduction of what Ulu Ulu is. So we are the official moving image archive for Hawaii. We preserve the moving image heritage. And so our primary goal is to take in, store and digitize analog materials. So we're focusing on tapes and films. And the reason we're doing that is because those are the things that are deteriorating fastest. And we want to make sure that a lot of these things are tapes or films that don't have players anymore. So if we can get them digitized faster, then we don't need to worry about the fact that the machinery is obsolete already. What we carry is all the major television stations, local and independent filmmakers, and home movies, in fact. So you could do research in home movies as well and see what life was like maybe in the 50s or the 60s. We provide access to the collection. That's one of our major goals, is to make sure that everyone has continued access to what we have in the collection. We are public, but we consider ourselves sort of semi-public because you do have to sign up with us to get full access to the footage. And the reason is that because these are donated items from filmmakers who oftentimes are still making things, their copyright is protected. And so we cannot show full-length material. So it might seem a little cumbersome that you have to sign the papers and you can only see 10% of the full length of the video, but it's to take care of the footage and make sure that it's used properly and people ask proper permissions. So people use us for all sorts of things: History Day, pleasure viewing, family history, and also new media projects. This is a little information on what is available in our collection. So these are actually last year's numbers. We have more than 80 permanent collections now, 45,000 videotapes and films. So we're a little bit closer to 55 now. We have been continuously accepting collections even during the pandemic. We're closer to 5,000 some odd reels digitized now, about 3,000 or so hours of footage. I don't know if this would matter, but also 217 terabytes of digital preservation masters. And I put some of our highlights here of some of the things that we've assisted with in the last couple of years. So Hawaiian Soul, that was released for the HIF last year, worked with us for a little bit. And we also had been able to help with the Asian Americans PBS series last year. And one of my favorites, Merata How Mom Decolonized Screen, which was done by her son. And it should still be available on Netflix, I believe. So why did I choose Off the Cutting Room Floor? So I wanted to emphasize Off the Cutting Room Floor because a long time ago, they would physically cut the film to edit it. And when they didn't want to use something, they would throw it on the floor and it would get swept away. But sometimes people kept those things, and sometimes that's where the treasures were. The things that I would consider cutting room floor material a lot of times would be things like our news tapes. And the reason why is because sometimes they just had things that were going to be edited out before they broadcast fully on the news, weren't necessarily always intended to be broadcast. And so if you watch those whole tapes, you might catch people saying things that weren't used in interviews that were broadcast, or different things happening in the background. People who were present. We caught one of the first times that we saw Haunani-K Trask do a talk, and she was just identified as a student doing a talk somewhere. And then of course there's things like B-roll, and B-roll is it's a filmmaking term that just means things that are shot as background and meant to be filler, but sometimes you get some really interesting things that you don't expect out of that. And the one thing I want to emphasize the most would be raw footage. Raw footage includes the interviews and other things that are happening that are meant to be edited down, but sometimes they are incredibly long interviews, and that's what makes them so interesting. We have filmmakers who have done dozens of hours of interviews with people, but they have to pare it down to a half an hour program. So if you have 20 hours, you lose a lot of amazing information. And so I want to share a little bit more on that. Why are things cut out, especially if it is great material? And a lot of times it's time, like I was mentioning, that if you happen to have a contract that only says you want a 22-minute, 28-minute film, but you interviewed 30 people for 2 hours each just to make sure that you were accurate and you were doing something high quality. A lot of these people kept all those interviews in the hopes that someday they would be unlocked for people again. And so we got a lot of those. The other thing is message. You get people who go off message. You get people who maybe start wandering when they're talking, and so they might cut that out and edit it down. All right, so here's an important thing, especially about archives, and especially about moving image archives. This is a big issue, and that's bias. I would, I guess the tack I want to take here is when you're comparing a library, like a public library, to something like our archive. Our archive was created for a purpose, where a lot of times in a library, whether it's a public library or an academic library, they are selecting to give you a well-rounded view of something. They are looking for edited materials that try to treat things fairly and represent all sides of a story as well as possible. If they have something that's biased, they try to find something that will balance it. But an archive, especially one like ours, may not have all sides. And I'll get into that a little bit more concerning, especially our archive in particular, because it has a special story. Our role is to preserve a side of the story. So what we're doing is we know that these are voices that we think are valuable, that have a lot of impact to the history of Hawaii. And so we want to make sure those voices are preserved. It may not be the whole story though. And so when you're using that material, it's important to remember that a lot of, especially when it's moving image material, is very emotional, it's very raw. And sometimes there's not enough context for someone to make an educated decision about what exactly is happening. And so archival material, it takes a lot more to work to interpret and make work within your project. But I think when you find that perfect something, it's really worth it. So it's just important to remember, we're not very balanced. We try to be, but it's what comes to us that we preserve. The other thing to remember is all filmmakers have agendas, whether they're commercial or they're independent, they want you to come to a certain conclusion. And so I was going to share with you a little bit here. Let me see if I can pull this up quickly. This was a demonstration that happened in 1978 at Hilo Airport. anyway, the reason I wanted to share that with you is that was a demonstration at the Hilo Airport in 1978, where demonstrators were unhappy with the fact that Hawaiian homelands were being used for the airport. And so they went out to make their voices known. That was a news segment that came out of KGMB at the time. And we have shared this footage several times with people who were there, and they felt that the way it was reported wasn't accurate. But the point of sharing that is that it was a very emotional event. And later on, many people came forward to say that the experience was very different for them. And so that's why it's important to remember that what we will have isn't always going to be the most balanced, and it's good to try to seek out the balanced information when you can. So what I wanted to do actually was get into a little bit about why this archive was created. And the reason why was because our founder knew that there were independent filmmakers working on all sorts of things that were important to themselves, but weren't being covered well in a lot of other ways. And she was worried that these things were going to disappear. These point of views weren't going to be preserved well, because these are just your average people feeling like this is something important to record and keeping these tapes at home. And so they knew that chances were that they wouldn't be able to be played anymore. And so she wanted to create some place to hold on to all of these materials. Interestingly enough, a lot of these individuals were teachers who saw what their students were going through and felt that what the students and families were going through were unfair injustices. And so they took it upon themselves to start taking out school equipment and going out and recording it on the weekend when they knew that there were demonstrations happening. And they ended up covering some of the most incredible movements in Hawaii history. So the number of evictions that were happening in the 1970s when people were trying to develop the land more, all sorts of clashes with the government, and of course the renaissance of the Hawaiian cultural and sovereignty movements here. And so had they not had the peace of mind to go and do that, we may not have had a lot of these things recorded. So moving forward, I listed a couple of the big collections that I think are of the most use to researchers, educators looking into things when you're talking about debate and diplomacy. A lot of times what was going on with the people who started these collections was they felt there was a lack of debate or diplomacy, and they were trying to push it forward. And so a lot of these collections are what I would call activist collections, Namaka Oka'aina, for instance, Victoria Keith, and of course Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana, that documented whatever they could about their endeavors to stop the bombings on the island of Kaho'olawe. There's First Friday, the Unauthorized News, which was an incredible series that ran for years, headed by David Stannard and Haunani K. Trask. And they always had great discussions. They were really interesting, civil, intense discussions about major issues throughout Hawaii and throughout the United States. And then there's the Center for Labor Education and Research. They are also part of the University of Hawaii, West Oahu, but their center is on labor history. So they were big on covering any of the strikes, any of the major movements, and the major players in the history of Hawaii's labor. So because I couldn't really focus on any just one thing, we have just so many things within the collection. So I just threw a few of the things out that have been touch points that people have asked about, that we've found just incidentally within our collection. Big discussions on what people felt about things like the prison furlough programs when they first started, how people felt about things like Ferdinand Marcos being exiled out to Hawaii in the 80s. So these are all things that show up in those newsreels, and especially in the raw footage and those long interviews that we have. So I'll show you just really quickly how to get to the information. So you would go to our collection at uluulu.hawaii.edu. There's a search box on every page, and I'll show you that in a little bit. If you can't find something, our email is there, or we have a form there. You can always ask us if it's there, and then we'll do a search. If it's not on the website, it may be somewhere else in the catalog. It's just not made public yet. And if you find something that you want to watch full length, then I'll give you the researcher registration form, and I can stream you till your heart's content. You can watch 4 hours at a time, for 2 weeks at a time, for the whole year. So we'll go to the website. And then what I wanted to emphasize, especially for History Day, would be this Explore area up here, because we have things packaged into neat themes already. So we have education, transportation, all that sort of stuff. But if you wanted to view more, we've been doing these for several years. So you could do something like the Daniel K. Inouye collection, which has a great deal of information in it. We have like his addresses to the people of Hawaii in the 60s of any major thing happening in Congress that he felt was worth sharing with everyone. And then we have these oral history interviews with people that the Daniel Inouye congressional collection decided to put together, of people that had worked with the senator over the years. So if you do see something, you can just click on it. It'll give you the clip, which obviously will not have sound if I share that with you, so I'm not going to show you that. But this is the information you need. If you decided that you liked this clip, you wanted to watch more of it, then you take the title here and the title number here. And those are the things that I need to help you get the full length material. And then I can stream that directly to you after you email me. Best way to do that is to click on this Ask an Archivist button here. And it'll take you to the contact information, and you can just fill it out in this form, send it to me, or you can use this email address. You can call us, but we have staggered schedules right now because of the pandemic, so we're not always on campus at the same time. So we don't always get to the phone, so email is the best way, or this form is the best. And I'll get back to you within the 24 hours, and we can start from there. So in the case of History Day, for a lot of instructors and teachers, what we'll do is we'll allow the teacher to actually just go ahead and register for their students, so that they don't need to do it all individually. So if you have a number of students that want to make use of moving images, then you can have them register just with you, and then you take responsibility for the students' work with us. Otherwise, the students can go ahead and register with us individually as well. And don't hesitate to register with us just individually, just to watch things and have a lot of fun. There's always some fun new stuff in our collection. We're always digitizing things and adding more to the website. So just really quickly, this is a film right in the middle here, this documenting activism that we did several years ago for the HIF, that shared a number of the activist films that were stored within our archive and who we happen to be working with very much at the time. So this person here in the corner is Victoria Keith, and she was one of those who started out as a teacher who felt like she just needed to get out there and document what was going on. And believe it or not, she was a Castle High School teacher, which I did not know for the longest time until I met her. And I was just blown away by that. So if you have any questions, let me know. You can check us out at Ulu at our website. These are the email addresses you can get me at. I wanted to share this quote with you. This is one of the filmmakers that donated to us, who was one of those individuals who did 20, 30 hours of interviews with people, but had to deliver tiny short programs. And he was just so sad that these tapes were shelved away and potentially to never be seen again. So when he realized he had this option to get things digitized with us, he told us it's like breathing new life into everybody. And I can't explain it any other way. I think it really is that, and being able to contribute to History Day in that way also makes me feel like we're giving all these people new life. So thank you very much for giving me your time. And if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tisha, for your amazing presentation. And wow, you got the resources. I've been listening to your present, I think the last 3 years, and I learned something every single, like, you guys are just increasing that archive, like, wow. So I'm gonna go and explore also.